Besides building models, we want to make sure that results from model can be understandable to non-GIS professionals. So we built a virtual analytical toolbox that is integrated with ArcGIS. This toolbox can provide functions to visualize cases, the spread dynamics, interaction between communities. We hope to deliver a visualization product that can engage stakeholders and engage public to participate in the process. So this is a big picture that summarizes the entire workflow. In this diagram, there are two important groups of models. One is the SIR model I mentioned earlier. Another big group of models is the graph embedding models, which are used to generate numerical representations as well as predict cases based on numerical representations. In the previous slides, I mentioned that SIR model can identify two types of cases separately if we have the net flow data as well as the basic population data. Both node embedding and diffusion embedding belong to a type of graph embedding. In the case of graph embedding, we treat all geographic regions as nodes in a network. And graph embedding can generate representations as the form of vector to capture properties of nodes as well as the interactions between nodes. And eventually, we can use the numerical representation of vectors to build regression models or spatial regression models to predict cases and establish the relationship between properties of nodes and the contribution to the final cases. Let me walk you through the workflow quickly. The inputs of the entire workflow are the data set from three sources. The first one is the social demographic data from census. We are able to gather neighborhood level social demographic data from census system, including population, poverty, employment, health status. And we also gather COVID cases from local public health agencies, as well as the commute flow count from our data partner, TomTom. They have bi-level daily commute flow count information for different regions within our study area. To enable this SIR learning, we need to use the basic population data and flow information between counties or geographic regions to generate predicted cases belong to two categories. And the basic demographic information, as well as the case information and flow information, are used to generate the result for node embedding and diffusion embedding. In the case of node embedding, we want to capture the transmission dynamics due to inner community spread. In the case of diffusion embedding, we want to capture the interaction between communities and use the numerical output from two types of embedding to establish a regression model and make predictions for the cases. After we are able to get the case prediction result, we get the output from the model, like the weight of neighboring features contributing to the spread or the spread dynamics due to inner community activities. We can perform geovisualization, such as the transmission path, case changes, as well as the community detection. So how does the prediction process actually work? We leverage a sequence-to-sequence prediction strategy. That is, in the input case, we need to have observations for multiple days, and we use the observation for multiple days to predict the output for multiple days as well. In this figure, it illustrates one simple case, as we have T days of observation as one sample data set. And we also consider the gap days, which is the incubation date of the COVID disease, and make predictions for H days, which means that for one set of prediction, we need to have atlas T plus Z plus H day as the prediction horizon. Remember, this is the AI model, so we need to have multiple observation samples to make prediction. So this is one of the potential issue with AI prediction. That is, we need to have extremely large number of samples in order to make valid prediction as the output. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the major findings from our case study. If you have further questions about methodology part, I'd like to explain the methodology part in more detail later on. We choose to study Colorado area just because our data partner are willing to provide data in this region. We have 6 counties in Denver metropolitan area as the study area. However, because of some limitations, we are able to obtain neighborhood level COVID cases for Douglas, Adams, and Arapahoe counties. We only be able to access county level COVID case data for Denver, Boulder, Broomfield, and Jefferson counties. Apparently, we will have some issues related to the scale effect as well as the boundary issue. For the regions outside of the 7 counties, we treat them as one big external node in the network construction for graph embedding. Another limitation for this data access is that we access the daily commute flow data from TomTom. They don't allow us to download the data set for entire Colorado. We have to limit the study area within this interesting portion within Colorado. At the same time, we access the social demographic data from Census ACS American Community Survey data in 2018. This is the map illustrates the study area and then the spatial granularity of the study area. In terms of the temporal coverage, we focus on the early stage of the pandemic, which is the time period from March till June. The reason we chose the time period because it covers 3 important or critical dates. In Colorado, we observed the first confirmed COVID case on March 5th, and the governor issued the stay-at-home order on March 26th. And then 2 months later, May 29th, Colorado was reopened statewide. So our selection of the time frame cover most important and critical dates related to the pandemic. According to the projection and modeling tools from CDPHE, that is most of the measurement methods will be in effect after 2 weeks. We implement measures. So when we report our initial findings, we focus on 3 important dates. The first one is March 12th, which is 1 week after the first case was confirmed in Colorado. The second one is April 12th, which is about 2 weeks after we had a stay-at-home order. And then June 12th is another important date, which is about 2 weeks after the state was completely reopened. I'd like to show you 4 groups of findings. The first group of findings focus on how the prediction works. As you can see in the 3 figures, each figure has a few pie charts, and the size of the pies indicate the total number of cases. And we decompose each pie into 2 sections. One is on the imported cases. The other one is on the cases due to community spread. In the early stage of the spread, we notice most of the small neighborhoods, most of the cases in those neighborhoods that due to inter-community spread, that is people get infected because they interact with people from other communities. And then in the middle stage of the pandemic, that is the time we already had a stay-at-home order, we see most of the cases are due to within community spread. Then if we move to June 12th, which is the time frame corresponding to the reopening stage, we see inter-community spread become more weight more in the total cases. So this kind of dynamic is really interesting to see the whole cycle of the spread within 3 months period. If we zoom in a little bit, we can check the transmission paths derived from the diffusion embedding, which characterize the weight, the contribution of neighboring regions contributing to the imported cases. At a very early stage, we noticed that Denver and Jefferson County are the two most important sources of transmission. They export cases to other neighborhoods. In the middle figure, it shows more small-sized neighborhoods become high risk or medium risk regions. They start infect other regions. When you look at the three figures, the color associated with the node indicate the level of risks. That is, what is the likelihood the node infect other regions, and the width of the lines indicate contribution to the imported cases to another region. And the direction of the line indicate origin and destination of the transmission path. Get back to the three figures. In the middle figure shows that more neighborhoods become part of the infectious chain. At the same time, we observe the overall transmission flow has been reduced by 50%. But still, the stay-at-home order does not immediately change the spread dynamics. Then if we move to the last figure, and that is the time we see the recovery of traffic flow, as a lot of people start traveling and commute within regions. The recovery rate is about 90%. At the same time, we see we have less number of medium risk neighborhoods, and the transmission path is weaker in general, which means that people get used to the stay-at-home order and change their behavior. They are more cautious about the spread in general. The third group of findings are related to the transmission tree, as we use the tool called distributed flow map to generate a long chain of the transmission path. This tool allows us to merge flow towards the same direction into a big line. And when the flow reaches to the final destination, we'll see branches. In this group of figures, we examine how many nodes are on a transmission tree from two important locations. One is Denver, another is a major transmission source in Douglas County. We also look at the strength of the transmission path that is measured or represented by the width of the lines. As we can see, this group of figures show similar pattern as what we can see in the previous groups of results. In the early stage of the spread, we see weak transmission links, but we gradually see more and more nodes or regions participate in the transmission path. And then towards, in the last figure, after we reopen the state, we see weaker transmission links, which is similar to the old transmission pattern we see in the previous group of figures. Then how exactly each neighborhood, what is the role of each of the neighborhood in the old transmission pattern? We further perform a classification analysis based on the numerical representation from embedding analysis. There are 5 general or 3 categories of nodes in the transmission chain. The first category is the transmission source hubs. Those are the nodes they consistently infect neighboring features, neighboring neighborhoods. And another category is called immediate sink node. Those are the nodes, they are not the final destination of the transmission path. They serve as sort of the chaining nodes in the transmission path. Another type is the final destination sink nodes. Those are the nodes that are infected by their neighboring nodes, but they are infected at a slower rate. When we look at the time, the result from different time steps, we see the role of different nodes or different regions do not change significantly, which indicates no matter what kind of measures we take, we cannot change the major role of those regions in the transmission chain, but we can gradually change human behavior or make some of the localized mitigation methods more effective. Another thing I want to point out here is that we cannot change the geographical locations of regions. So like Denver is a transmission hub, so we can change the role of this transmission hub, but we still can enforce some localized mitigation methods to limit the spread eventually. So in conclusion, this is very preliminary set of results that I want to present. We demonstrate the possibility of using multi-source data and AI models to examine the spread dynamics beyond traditional prediction case information. We are able to decompose case into different categories and use the decomposed information to analyze the interactions between regions and contribute to the overall spread dynamics. And we are able to generate transmission path, transmission trees to show how the spread move across the region. And our approach potentially can evaluate preventive measures like stay-at-home measures given spatial and temporal scales and spatial temporal constraints. In our case study, we were somewhat limited by the availability of data sets. So we have the mixed composition of regions. If we're able to get better data, we can run final level analysis and inform the general public in a better way. So future studies, we want to explore the applicability of the methods. We also want to refine and re-evaluate approach, especially if we're able to get contact tracing data, we can validate whether our transmission chain is correct or not. This is the summary for our work. And finally, I really appreciate all the GIS experts and professionals for their roles in this pandemic. They have done a lot of work, releasing a lot of data, make data set public available in a quick fashion. I would like to thank our data collaborators, Tom, Denver South TMA, Public Health Department from Tree County and the state of Colorado. Okay, that's the quick report of our project. Any questions?
Hi, Jin. Let me see. Hi, Jin Lee. How was the results accepted or taken by the health department? What did they think of it?
That's the tricky part. I was trying to reach out to the public health department. Actually, I was able to contact Tree County Public Health Department. They do not provide any feedback. They just say this is interesting and they would keep it for their reference. So one of the reasons that I present here is that I want to get some feedback from a larger community, make sure this work is really valuable to the general public.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions or? Well, thank you so much, Ying Li, for presenting.
Thank you. Please stop share.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have got our next presenter. Go ahead, Jackie.
We have Milton, who will be presenting a framework of putting big data to work for GIS applications.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Rachel. Let me share my screen. Let me see if you see my PowerPoint.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So good morning and thank you for joining the meeting today. My name is Milton and I work for StreetLight Data. A little bit about me. I've been working for StreetLight Data since early February, and which was an interesting time to switch jobs. And I only been in one business trip, and I actually been enjoying working from home, which is kind of fun. Even though I'm fairly new to StreetLight Data, I've been in the geospatial industry for over 30 years. I worked for Esri for 15 years. And after I left Esri, I went to work for Here Technologies, primarily working with Esri while I was there. Love the whole GIS industry. It's been kind of a nice way to make a living. This is the agenda for today. So I'll just talk a little bit about big data for transportation analytics. So there's some relationships to the previous presentations in terms of using big data for exploring and discovering new insights into the phenomenon that we are exploring. Then we'll talk about how using our platform, is called StreetLight Insight, helps change or look at how you do transportation planning, how we bring that data into GIS, and then I'll do some case studies and a quick demo. But big data, you know, I'm sort of preaching to the choir here, being able to use big data to make informed decisions. I think we all get it. A lot of the work that we do in GIS it has to be driven by data. Without it, GIS just you know, it doesn't really go anywhere. But big data has become of age in the last 8-10 years. Our company was founded in 2011, which in some ways is kind of interesting because by that time, big data was a fairly ubiquitous term. People had a better understanding of what can we do with so much data that is everywhere. And the second thing that will work well for us is that we came of age in a period where developing solutions on the web-based solutions was sort of the way to go. We didn't have to build a desktop solution or a server solution or anything like that. So we have certainly benefited from that. Transportation has changed a lot and significantly quite a bit in the last 8 or 10 months since the COVID-19. So we went from very busy roads, and we were already seeing in many of our communities, the scooters, the growth and the embracing of a lot of folks of bicycling and using cycling to get around, another mode of transportation to go to work besides just being something for leisure and exercise. And then COVID-19 hit, and many of our roads, streets, boulevards, and highways emptied out, as Jen described in her previous presentation. And now they're filling up again with vehicles. And so it's presented a number of serious challenges on how to document and track and make sense of how the movements of goods and movements of people to do different things every day. How has that changed, and how do you document that? And one great way to do that is by looking at big data. So one of the things that the gentleman is on my left screen, I don't know what's out of your screen, the guy kneeling down. Typically the way transportation departments or anybody interested in having an understanding of what happens on our roads, they will go out and lay a cable, much like that cable that he's lying there, and that will be what is called a temporary counter or a permanent counter. And a temporary counter will be laid on a road on a highway for say 48 hours, as opposed to a permanent counter that is there for 365 days. And then they collect that data, and they then make extrapolate, particularly on a temporary count, extrapolate what the volume of cars will be on that road. But all you capture is really just the number of cars that went over that cable. You didn't know where those cars came from or where they went. Big data, we tap into, and you see on the screen, there is those purple and yellows and whites. The purple ones is data coming from connected vehicles and connected devices, or devices installed on commercial trucks, where the yellows and the whites is the information that is coming out from our mobile phones. So pretty much everyone in North America has one of this. The market penetration of cell phones is upwards of 90%. So we tap into about 40 billion of those pings every month. And what we do, and let me just go back here, what we do is that we try to then string together those, sorry about that. We try to string together all these 40 billions and string them together to form what we call a trip. So if somebody left a zip code or a census tract or a traffic analysis zone to go to work or whatever the case may be, we string together all those pings and we form every month 1.5 billion trips, which is an incredible amount of data that you can use then to do all type of analysis. And we take those trips and we bring them into our interactive platform that allows you to do analysis. So what you see here on the screen, that little polygon is just a little shapefile that you draw anywhere on the road. I just happened to put that on the road, sort of mimic what this guy is doing here with that cable. But I can certainly make that polygon bigger and make it cover, say, a new business development area or a shopping center, or it could be a neighborhood, or it could be an entire census tract or an entire county. And what we do is do analytics around what happens within that polygon, that sort of area of service. So how many trips went through that polygon, or how many then were initiated from inside that polygon, or how many trips ended with inside that polygon, and then how do those trips behave either within that polygon or outside of the polygon. So that information is brought into our platform called Insight, and is updated. Let me just go back here. It's updated every 2 weeks, or bi-monthly, I should say. So it's an interactive platform. It allows you to do analytics, and these are analytics that you can continue to use within this platform, or you can then, once the analysis have been completed, you can take that data, those metrics, and bring them into a GIS system, whatever system you happen to be using. So what we're trying to do is apply new technologies to traditional techniques and ways of collecting data. So on the left side, you see the traditional ways of collecting data, and this is sort of a pros and cons and different things like that. We use big data. As a big data company, one of the things that we need to do is that we use machine learning algorithms to analyze the data that we're collecting, those 40 billion pings of data, turning them into 1.5 billion trips. And to do that using machine learning algorithms, we need to have what we call data for training the trainer of the machine learning. So we do rely on traditionally collected data in order to train our machine learning algorithms in order to produce the metrics that we have. What this slide also shows you is that using big data not only saves you time, is much more affordable, no one gets in harm's way, and it allows you to collect data for every road in North America 365 days a year. So being able to use big data coming from mobile phones and from data from connected vehicles, you can then develop algorithms to determine different types of modes of analytics. So is this a commercial vehicle? Is this a passenger vehicle? Is this a bicycle? Is this a pedestrian? And then you can do those analysis on the platform. So as I mentioned before, we tap into about 40 billion pings of data. But one thing that I want you to take away from today's presentation is that the data is anonymized. By the time we get the data from the different sources from which we source the data, any privacy information has been removed. So we are able to sort of analyze the way movements of groups of people, but never a movement of one specific individual. We couldn't, and I'm going to pick on Rachel Medina, we couldn't identify Rachel Medina's cell phone or anything like that. We couldn't do that. And in fact, if somebody wanted to go into our platform and put one of those polygon shape files around my house or somebody's house, we will immediately reject that analysis because of privacy privacy laws. So that's one key thing that I want to make sure that everybody takes away from this presentation today. So we are, by using the data and using the machine learning algorithms, we can infer the type of trips that you're making. So I mentioned here, commercial cars, bicycles, pedestrians. We can actually, by looking at the pattern behavior or travel behavior of those things, we can infer also if this is a Uber or a Lyft type of trip. We can then also do fundamental analytics, origin destination. So you saw in the previous presentation how Junli used origin destination as part of head analysis. So origin destination is probably one of the key things that when you're dealing with this type of big data is one of the first steps or the first things that you do in order to do other analysis. So you can then do annual average daily traffic counts or monthly or hourly. You can infer the trip speed, what was the duration of a trip. You can also infer the trip purpose. Was this a home to work or some other type of trip? And you can also infer demographics, because one of the things that we do is that we tap into the US Census demographic data to get a better understanding of what kind of those groups of people, where are they moving, how are they moving, where are they going? And it's something that becomes really critical, particularly in this day and age where there's a lot of conversation about social equity issues. This is probably one of my favorite slides. It really talks about StreetLight data. Where do we fit in the transportation world? So there is asset management, there is construction, there's design, and where we fit best is in these three buckets. So the transportation planning, engineering, and we're very much active in the whole concept of smart cities and new mobility. So before and after studies, which are also known as performance measurements, and what that means is that you got some funding from the state, or you got some funding from the federal government to improve a road where there had been too many accidents, or maybe the traffic was too slow. So you can actually, once the project is completed and new data becomes available, you can go back in time and look at what it is today and what it was the same period last year and 2 years and 3 years ago. And that's a key point, because when you get access to our platform, you not only get access to 2020 data, you get access to data that we have collected since as far back as 2014 for commercial vehicle data, and since January 1st of 2016 for passenger vehicle data, bike and pedestrian. Travel time, corridor studies, turning movement counts, that's critical for anybody who's doing ITS and traffic light engineering. As I mentioned, we're very much into the whole concept of how do we help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There was a big drop in VMT, vehicle miles travel. The previous speaker spoke about that because of COVID-19, and many transportation departments are interested in how to use big data and with other policy and behavior type methodologies to encourage people to reduce the number of trips that they make. Okay. Once the data is processed into the platform, you can bring this data into, in this case, I just happen to use some GIS examples, and I'm going to see if I can show you those. So in this case, this is one, congestion pricing is something that has become an interesting way to raise revenue for departments of transportation. As you know, many departments of transportation fund themselves by using the gas tax money. And with COVID-19 and so many folks staying home or working from home, those gas tax revenues have gone down. So the concept of congestion pricing is becoming a little interesting. This is by our colleagues at the Boston Consulting Group, and they're using our GIS online. In this case, they were looking at 4 different cities in the United States as part of this analysis. And one of the things that they needed to use in their platform was to be able to bring origin destination. They need to look at a speed of vehicles. So you see in this case, they started bringing the origin destination data and trip speeds from StreetLight data in order to do their analysis, in addition to other things, the community survey, American Community Survey, also mentioned by the previous speaker, and things like that. So that's one example. Another example, and I need to move this, is this is by Sandag, is the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization for San Diego. And in this case, they wanted to look at understanding the travel pattern behavior of freight, commercial vehicles across the border. And in order that they needed to be able to do, they have some of their own data, but one of the things that they needed to be able to do was start bringing some StreetLight data. So again, they did an origin destination analysis, then they did a volume analysis, the entire volume of all the trips, and then they wanted to go further and refine the analysis by just looking at freight or commercial vehicle information. And that's the kind of data that we can make available to our platform. And the last example is, this is from the Tulsa, Oklahoma Metropolitan Planning Organization. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to provide to the public at no cost traffic counts. So the way it works today is that somebody will have to, before they had this implementation, somebody will have to call the planning department or the transportation department, fill out a form, and then they will come back and give them information about the number of trips and that were happening on this particular road. But with this ArcGIS online implementation, anybody can go in, you don't have to pay anything, and you just get access to the information. And notice here that they, in this particular case, they have 2017, 2018. I think they'll be adding 2019 soon, and then 2020 once the entire year is completed. So that's the kind of, one of the things that you can do with the platform is to be able to either stay within our platform, do the analysis on that platform, or you can then export the data and bring it into other type of, either into a GIS or a Tableau or whatever other visualization tool you want to use. Just a couple of notes on that last example for the Oklahoma MPO. So they wanted to be able to provide the traffic counts within the Tulsa region to the public. So they were using traffic analysis zones. So you could use zip codes or census tract or something like that. But in this case, they wanted to use traffic analysis zone, which is a pretty standard for transportation type analytics. And then they were making the data available to the public. And one of the things that they were able to identify is who's using this data. So traffic counts, so retail and commercial, lawyers, interestingly enough, you know, kind of makes sense. They want to look at exposure levels for accidents, particularly bike, pedestrian, and things like that. County commissioners, obviously city engineers and city planners. So lots of different folks that can leverage that type of data. We are a web-based platform, so we're doing about 6,500 reports per month. You find us pretty much in all the metropolitan and statistical areas in the United States and Canada. And in addition to selling primarily to DOTs and transit agencies and MPOs and things like that, we do work quite a bit with engineering firms, and engineering firms do a lot of work for those government agencies. So we do count on them to help them do their work. A couple of case studies here, and then I'll do a quick demo. This is a project in Northern Virginia. And one of the things that Virginia DOT wanted to look at is, where are we spending our dollars? So DOTs are supposed to be good stewards of the public monies. You know, it's not just building roads and highways like it used to be. You really need to be much more precise on how you invest those dollars. So one of the things that they did was look at use our platform to go back in time as far back as 2014 or 2016 and compare each year where actually trips were taking place. How do they relate to the location of businesses and things like that? You know, typical geospatial type analytics or metrics in order to make decision as to where to invest money and to prioritize projects. This is something that we hear a lot from departments of transportation, and something that we hear more and more because of the pandemic and the economic crisis. Many of them are strapped with less money and they need to sort of make a good decision as to where to invest their dollars. This is another example for this for the same area. This is the Hampton Roads MPO in Virginia as well. And they really wanted to figure out if they were going to do road improvements, where will those dollars be invested, particularly as they relate to freight transportation. So being able to tap into our platform and access the big data and see actually which roads are used by freight, it's something that was that really helped them facilitate where to invest their monies. This one had to do with social equity. So in the case of San Diego, they were going to adding a toll road. And one of the comments there was, is this going to impact people of color or traditional disadvantaged communities? And they wanted to be able to look at the demographics associated with all the trips and see whether or not people of color were going to be impacted more than any other community in that particular area. This one it's been kind of fun. We partnered with Siemens, and as you all know, electric vehicles are becoming very popular. The state of Colorado has EV, a very aggressive program to set up EV charging stations all over the state. This happens to be an example from Santa Clara, California, and they wanted to make some decisions of not just putting EVs anywhere, but looking at how do people navigate in the Santa Clara area. In other words, trip patterns, trip behaviors, how long the trips are, where do they go in the morning, how long do those cars sit in those parking lots and things like that, in order to make better decisions as to where to set up the EV charging station. So hotspot analysis and things like that is part of this conversation. This one is about safety, and this one is looking at bicycle collisions of bicycles in the San Francisco area. But what's interesting about that is the concept of exposure. So if you look at the graphic on the left, I'm a cyclist myself, so I look at that graphic and it's like, oh my gosh, look at all those accidents. But once you look at the exposure rate associated with the number of collision data associated with bike volume. So where those bikes moving the most. So you can quickly identify some of the hotspot analysis and then look at the design and other structures in that where those accidents are located and trying to identify where all those accidents happening and try to figure out what the remediations are for that. As part of that effort, we formed a collaboration agreement with Ford Mobility to basically exactly look at that, is look at where accidents are happening, look at hotspot analysis. We implementate a lot of the measure of the Federal Highway Safety Manual, and then we bring volume data for a commercial vehicle, passenger, bike, and ped into our platform and combine the two of them to really make determination as to where those accidents are happening and what kind of measures, countermeasures, they're called them in the safety industry, need to be applied, and then calculate a cost-benefit analysis of what it will cost to implement, making modifications to the road and things like that in order to save lives. This one relates a little bit to the previous presentation. These are looking at travel patterns during COVID-19. This was during the April-May period of last year versus April-May of this year in the Detroit Ann Arbor area. And what you see on the left side is lots of folks coming from Ann Arbor coming to work in the Detroit area, where on the right side you see that a lot of those trips have dropped, but the number of folks or trips actually happening within Ann Arbor have gone up. So it allows you to sort of look what's happening in that community, to look at what else needs to be done in order to help with the different type of measures that the previous speaker talked about. This is in the same area. These are VMT, vehicle miles travel, and it kind of lines up nicely with what she discovered for around, I think she mentioned April 14, there was a drop in about 50% on travel, which is somewhere around here. And it's kind of interesting, sort of the same pattern. This is in Oakland County and the Detroit area. I think it's probably true for a lot of parts of the United States that by that time, the number of vehicles miles travel had dropped considerably by April, but then you see them go back up to 80–90% of what used to be the old normal back in the June period. This one is another one that has become very popular. Actually, some of this analysis have been done in Rocky Mountain here in Colorado, where they were actually looking at who goes to the parks, to the national parks, and how far are people willing to travel to go to the park, and how much time do they spend at the park. And in the case of Rocky Mountain, they actually, because it's so large, to be able to identify how do they behave within the park, because that can help the park determine where to put, bathrooms or garbage cans and things of that nature. So again, travel behavior and how that relates to parks and bike and ped as a way to measure economic development impact. So many communities are discovering that, hey, if we build bike trails and mountain biking trails, people are loving doing that sort of thing. And in this particular case, this was in Hampton Roads, and they were able to identify using our platform that actually 50% of the cyclists that came to spend time cycling in that area came from outside the region. So that helps. In this case, the Hampton Roads Transportation Plan Organization helped them do better marketing. So when they invest their marketing dollars to bring people into their community to do biking, where should they invest those marketing dollars? Pass-through congestion, this is a very popular, lots of folks complaining, oh, there's a lot of people cutting through my neighborhood to go someplace else. So one of the nice things about using our platform is that you can actually identify that type of behavior and see, are people cutting through neighborhoods in order to go someplace else? And you can do that against passenger vehicles, or you can do that as well against commercial vehicles. In this case, this was a study done by Foot & Pierce, one of the engineering firms that we work with. And before I switch to the demo, so one of the things that we have discovered, even though primarily since 2011, we've been doing a lot of work in the transportation planning space, what we discovered in the last 2 or 3 years is that we find ourselves working more and more with economic development agencies. Health, I think COVID-19 really opened it up for us to do a lot more work with the public health and private health organizations. Retail, many of them want to be able to see who comes by my store. How far are people willing to go to shop from one place to another? Same thing for real estate development as well as finance. So those are just sort of the industry that we've been seeing more and more tapping into big data, this type of information coming from mobile phones to do analysis. And let me do a quick demo here, and then we'll stop. Sorry about that. And this is Boulder County, and I'm in Louisville. But this was kind of fun. I was talking to one of the communities here, and they said, "Hey, with your platform, could you just tell me how many cars are going through that intersection on South Boulder Road and McCaslin, which is a fairly busy intersection?" So all I did was basically let me just zoom out a little bit. I just drew a polygon, a little shapefile around that intersection. So one of the things that I did is that it covers those folks that travel both east, west, people coming from McCaslin, they will either typically go west towards Boulder, or they go right towards Louisville or Lafayette. I could have draw 4 polygons, one right here, one here, another one right here, another one right here, in order to do a traffic movement counts, which is what if I'm looking to calibrate that traffic light, that's what a lot of those folks in traffic operations did. But the question here wasn't so much about how folks are turning, how many cars are turning left, right, go straight, and things like that. It was just how many vehicles go through that intersection. So in this case, you see there, the number came up to be about 20,000. And I need to move this thing here. So you can get a count of the number of vehicles, but I can go farther than that. I can actually look at travel by tapping into the demographic data. I can actually, this is for the entire 2019. So on the average, you know, who are college folks, who has a bachelor's degree, who has a graduate degree, by family status, right? So families with no kids, kids between 6 and 17 years old, traffic by income. Again, this is based on, because we are able to determine where people are traveling from, and two, we can then infer the demographics based on that traffic analysis zone or that census tract or that zip code, as well as by race as well. Another thing that we can also infer is the duration of that trip, 10 to 20 minutes or 40 to 50 minutes, the length of that trip, 5 to 10 miles or 10 to 20 miles, as well as speed and so on. One of the things that we always do when you use our platform is that we give you the metadata. So how many, you know, these are the details of the data that was collected for this analysis. I'm looking at the entire 2019, but I'm also telling you how many devices were used for this analysis. So there were 36,000 devices and almost 300,000 trips during that period of time in order to do this calculation. So we always provide that back to you. Now let me zoom out a little bit here, and you might find this interesting. So if I look at home location grids, and what that means is we're able to infer what the home location is by looking at where that particular mobile devices spend the night, so to speak. So if devices are consistently spending the night between 9 and 4 a.m. at a specific zip code or census tract or whatever that may be, we infer that that's the home location of those devices. And then I can also then look at the work location, meaning, okay, so in the morning, where do they go to work? So in this case, it's getting updated, and you'll see that a lot of people who live in this area, many of them actually work in this area, or they're going to work in North Boulder or to Boulder. A few go to Longmont. If I zoom out a little bit more, you'll see that some of these folks are also going, obviously, into the Denver area as well. So if you're doing trip analysis and traffic analysis, is how far are people traveling? Are they living near their communities that they work, and things like that. And I think I have a minute to show. This is an origin destination of analysis, similar, same area. We're able to do figure out how do people, I think I'm using zip codes in this one, how people are traveling from one place to another, the same type of demographics. But we can also give you a matrix table of basically how people travel from one zip code to another zip code. And I believe that's all I have. Are there any questions? Are there any questions?
That was a really great presentation. It seems like incredibly useful data.
Absolutely. Happy to, anybody who wants to reach out, and I can make this presentation available if you like, Rachel.
Hey, Milton, I've got a quick question.
Yes.
Has any of the, in the demos you were showing, was there any other methodology used to try to verify the accuracy?
Mm-hmm. And when you're referring to accuracy, which accuracy you're referring to?
Thank you. A very, very good question. Let's say the verification of your numbers that you're coming up with in terms of the people going through the intersection.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, was that coupled with like the typical traffic count methodologies that they use?
Yeah, Pete, that's a great question. So, yeah, so big data needs to be calibrated. So you get a lot of big data from mobile homes, mobile phones, but it needs to be calibrated against it. So you may recall in one of my earlier slides, I talked about how we use data that was collected through traditional methods with those counters to actually calibrate the data and train the machine learning algorithms and calibrate the data. So the answer is yes, and we actually have white papers on this that have been validated both internally and externally by universities and DOTs and things like that. So Pete, the answer is yes, we do need to calibrate the data. The data is already calibrated by the time you get access to the platform. So I think we tap into 12,000 permanent counters from all different parts of the United States. But if you have some additional local data, it's as simple as just select and upload that data, and it recalibrates the data even farther for your local community. So the answer is yes, we do need some traditional data in order to calibrate the counts that we produce.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Oh, yeah, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking at some of the questions here. Can you use the cycling data to also infer obesity rates of certain area? That's a really good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that. And here's the reason I say that. I'm a cyclist. And obviously we do know from reading the news that, you know, the rate of obesity in Colorado are fairly low because we have such a outdoorsy culture, you know, bike trails, the concept of walking and things like that. But I also spend about 4 to 5 months out of the year in Minnesota every summer, where we don't think that they have a concept of cycling culture. But they actually, some of the first bike trails and rails to trails were actually from Minnesota back in the early 1900s. And I find that there is quite a bit of cycling there, but I think their obesity rates are much higher than the ones in Colorado. So I don't know that, it's a really good question. I don't know, WRK is, I don't know that we can quite infer that. Just by looking at that. Sorry, that's probably not a very good answer there, but I'm not sure I can make that that assessment. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so we're a little ahead of a schedule, so I'm thinking we take a short break so we can keep on schedule, and maybe we'll come back at 10:30, 10:35. If that sounds good to folks. All right, I'll count that as a yes.
Yes.
Yeah, don't anybody log out. Just go ahead and take a break for a minute or two.